We do have a action-packed, info-heavy conversation for you today, so we will get started. Anyone who is joining late, don't be shy, hop into the chat, and we'll get you into the fold as quickly as possible. So thank you to anyone who has not seen my or heard my welcome message so far. I just want to say welcome again, and thank you so much for tuning in to Understories. This is a very special edition live from COP15, which is the 15th meeting of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and it's happening as we speak in Montreal. So today you'll hear firsthand the news unfolding by the minute at COP15, where representatives from 196 governments, joined by industry stakeholders, Indigenous peoples, and scientists and academics, are gathered to adopt a globally agreed upon framework to tackle the biodiversity crisis. So joining live from Montreal, Peter Wood will outline just what's at stake at COP15 and shed light on the solutions Canopy is bringing forward. And how has Canopy collaborated with industry giants to prevent forest degradation? Canopy's Amanda Carr, hi Amanda, will also join to share why our 30 by 30 action plan won't be deterred. For anyone that I haven't met yet, my name is Katie Hicks. I'm Financing Change Manager at Canopy, and I'm joining you today from Vancouver Island. For thousands of years, the Cowetsan, Malahat, Subaset, Halalt, Penalakat, Zeminis, and Liaxin peoples have walked gently on the traditional territories for community, social, economic, and spiritual purposes. They have never given up title on this land, nor have they ever been compensated for it. Nutsli kunischi tu Cowetsan, Mistaimo, Ututamix, Miskutrip, Utuno, Quail, I Haichka. Thank you. So a few notes about our session today. Please feel free to ask a question by using the chat function on your screen, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the session. Try not to DM Peter, Amanda, or myself directly, as we won't be able to view your questions. So make sure that you are messaging everyone, and one of our team members will collect your question for you. If we don't get to your question today, we will happily follow up via email, or you can reach out anytime, day or night, to hello@canopyplanet.org. If your internet connection does cut out, you're welcome to use the phone dial-in numbers. They can be found in your event invite, or if you saved them from the chat, we can always put them in there too. That way you can rejoin the call without data. So to turn on closed captioning as well, I do know I speak a little quickly. You're welcome to click on the More button in your Zoom function. It's the three buttons sort of on the bottom right before the Leave. Don't press the Leave button. We want to have you here with us. Click on More and you can select Captions and select your English or language preference, I believe there. And that sort of covers our housekeeping. So we will get right into today. The question du jour: what does protecting forest biodiversity look like in action? So I'm joined today by Peter Wood, Ph.D. and Senior Forest Campaigner at Canopy, along with Amanda Carr, who is Canopy's Director of Strategic Initiatives. So a little bit about Peter to give you some background. Peter Wood has dedicated his life and academic career to forest management and environmental protection. Deeply woven into that work is his passion for human rights, safeguarding Indigenous communities, and primary forests as one intersecting issue. Peter holds a Ph.D. in forestry from the University of Toronto, and his dissertation examined the impact of forest certification on forest management and policy in Canada. So we'll hear today how Peter leverages decades of forest advocacy into his campaign work at Canopy, and what it will take at COP15 to halt compounding climate issues. So we'll hear from Peter soon. Amanda Carr informs and leads Canopy's work in the fashion sector under our campaign initiative Canopy Style, which is now over 500 brands strong, a major milestone. Amanda brings decades of international environmental work to Canopy, and her conservation successes include the negotiation of the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, protecting over 7 million acres of rare coastal temperate rainforest, and securing a $120 million private-public conservation financing package. So Amanda will share her experiences building collaborative initiatives that position business as movements. All right, we are ready to jump right in and find out what is happening on the ground. So Peter, COP15 is the biggest biodiversity conference to happen in a decade. For this year's conference, how has Canopy prepared to tackle biodiversity loss? And what is on the agenda for this pivotal conference in what we're calling a turnaround decade? Over to you, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Katie. There's a lot happening here in Montreal, and I like to think of it as two different events, really. There's the core negotiating event that happens between governments, and then there's hundreds and hundreds of events that happen around it. It's a 12,000 person event, and it really is kind of like the Super Bowl for biodiversity. And everyone from around the world comes here to discuss solutions, discuss challenges, and it really is an exciting place to be. In terms of a live update from what's happening here, where we're at is at the end of a year of pre-meetings that led up to this event, where governments have been hashing out details of the global biodiversity framework. Now, this is supposed to kind of set out what the world will aspire to do to try to solve the biodiversity crisis between now and 2030. But unfortunately, that has resulted in a lot of what we call bracketed text. So there's more options being debated than ever. There's not a lot of resolution in terms of coming to consensus. So these next, couple of weeks are really going to be important to see if we can arrive at a consensus agreement there. And we're going to find out if the governments in the world will agree to a level of ambition that's commensurate with the challenges that we're facing. And so, scientists have agreed that we really need to aim towards at least 50% protection eventually. And this has resulted in this nature needs half slogan. And that for this current time frame, the 2030, we should aspire to get 30% of the world's oceans and lands into a protected status. And so this is a high level of ambition because for many countries, the current rate of protection is in the low teens, if that. So this is really important to set that bar high. This 30 by 30 slogan is one that Canopy has been championing for quite some time. And we've always aspired to increase the amount of protection of the world's most vulnerable forests, the ancient and endangered forests. And one of the ways that we do that is to ensure that we reduce the pressure that we put on the world's forests, and that enables and frees up areas that would be able to be put into protected areas. And in addition to just these numbers, there's also a really important consideration of how this work is done. And so here, Canopy and many other groups have been advocating for a rights-based approach to protected areas creation that's done on the basis of what's called UN DRIP, or the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that's really taken center stage here at COP15. There are dozens and dozens of events that are solely focused on the role of Indigenous-led conservation and the ways in which safeguards for Indigenous rights can be woven into the agreement. Currently, they are relegated to a bit of a preamble that does not have any kind of binding status. So here are the negotiations. A lot of groups are pushing to get UN DRIP featured into the more operative text, the more sort of binding nature of the treaty. We are here, Canopy, in the lead up to this, we've got a sign-on letter from the world's producers of viscose, which is made of forestry fiber conventionally. And we have a sign-on letter representing over 75% of the world's producers, calling for a strong 30 by 30 agreement grounded in Indigenous rights, as well as focused on primary forests and ancient and endangered forests within that 30%. So yeah, it's a really exciting time to be here.
Thank you so much, Peter. It is really exciting to hear how people are coming together. It feels like the focus around the 30 by 30 goal is integral to COP15 this year. In the news cycle around COP15, it became increasingly clear that biodiversity loss and climate change are inextricably linked. And Canopy's work, as you mentioned, is pillared on protecting ancient and endangered forests. So how can we define the importance of intact forests in mitigating or exacerbating climate risks? And ultimately, what hangs in the balance for primary forests? And how is Canopy uniquely positioned to push back if needed?
So the science is becoming increasingly clear that primary forests, forests that have never been logged, play an outsized role in both climate change protection and biodiversity protection. And that's for a number of different reasons. But it really represents the accumulation of thousands of years of carbon, soil development, the development of very rich understories, forests that have structural complexity. This takes many, many years. We may be in awe of a 1,000-year-old tree, but that 1,000-year-old tree is really not just a 1,000-year-old tree. That's a 10,000-year-old system that's produced that 1,000-year-old tree. So it's just completely different than when we're looking at plantations or other secondary forests in terms of their value and that intersection of biodiversity and climate. But what's really surprising for many people is that the international statistics on forests often conflate primary forests and forests that have never been logged with plantations and second growth forests that are heavily degraded in terms of their biodiversity and climate values. And so a lot of statistics make it look as if we're holding constant or even increasing our forest area, even as we're replacing our primary forests with those that are much less rich. And this is to the detriment of the climate and biodiversity crises. So we are looking to have primary forests distinguished within this agreement to be recognized as uniquely important for addressing these problems. There's a launch of an alliance called the Primary Forest Alliance that Canopy is proudly part of, that's bringing together dozens of organizations that are making that call for primary forests to be recognized specifically within this treaty that's supposed to be agreed here in Montreal. So that is something that is, could result in a real change. We know that the preeminent scientific bodies like the IUCN have made a policy statement recognizing primary forests and intact forests as providing this additional benefit. So, I think that to ignore that is to ignore science. It would really be tone deaf to ignore all of the preeminent scientists of the world that are calling for this recognition. We are really hoping that the world's governments will start to listen. But if they don't, Canopy still has a backup plan. So if they do come up with a strong 30 by 30 protection plan, we will work within that. We will call on governments to honor that commitment, and we will continue to do our work with that mountaintop goal now becoming the world's mountaintop goal. But if the negotiations fall apart, the beauty of Canopy's work is that we can still continue on. We are based around building leverage with over 500 brands in the world, representing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. That can be directed towards encouraging the adoption of conservation measures for ancient and endangered forests and getting our supply chains off of these endangered ecosystems. So either way, we're in a good place to continue our work here at Canopy.
Thanks, Peter. That's extremely encouraging, especially to hear about the distinction of primary forests as they're categorized under some of these movement pieces. As we know, if we're targeting 30% area, it has to be areas where there's dense biodiversity for it to really make a difference. So Amanda, you've been so patient, and I want to bring you in here because leveraging market stakeholders as the plan B, or the inroad for conservation, is exactly how you brokered the protection of 7 million acres in the Great Bear Rainforest. So can you tell us a little bit more about how the marketplace can influence critical change like this?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe just a shout out, because I think just looking at the attendee list today, and of course always the agreements in the Great Bear Rainforest are shared as a success story for many, and there's still work to do. So our coastal temperate rainforests are very, very rare. There's of course the Great Bear Rainforest. There's also ongoing work that needs to happen on places like Vancouver Island, and I know for many of our supporters, and for our work in the world, not losing sight of that is really, really important. So coastal temperate rainforests only ever covered less than 1% of the Earth's forest ecosystem. So as Peter describes, these are the kinds of irreplaceable ancient endangered forests that Canopy is very focused on. 1,000-year-old cedar trees, salmon streams teeming, and things like the rare white spirit bear, all really, really iconic. And sometimes we can lose sight of it, I think, in negotiations like COP15 and bracketed text, but that's really what we try to keep our focus on at Canopy. In the Great Bear Rainforest specifically, and I think this applies to forests around the world, and why Canopy is so focused on sort of engaging and shifting the marketplace. What we learned, and what government representatives have actually said to us, is that in many cases it's very hard for them to lead, to really go beyond stakeholders, and lead by example, and be really, really aggressive in sort of the things that need to happen to solve the climate crisis. And so inadvertently, companies are every day sending the signal that cutting down forests makes money. Right. And so a company on the other side of the planet selling clothing in Europe might have no idea that they're sending and putting pressure on a place like the Great Bear Rainforest, like Indonesia's rainforests, the Amazon, etc. And so what Canopy's work does is engage all of those corporate customers. We partner with them, have them put in place procurement policies for their wood products. We don't have any financial arrangement with them. It really is them saying publicly that they don't want to source from these ancient and endangered forests. And in doing so, they shift the signals that they're sending. So they basically clarify for jurisdictions like British Columbia that if you're not taking care of your ancient endangered forests, if you're not conserving enough, if outside of those irreplaceable forests, if you don't have FSC certification, for example, that you're not sort of selling products that are welcome into the marketplace. So fast forward above and beyond the Great Bear Rainforest, the First Nations leadership there, of course, critically important in the equation, but Canopy's niche and Canopy's role is really focused on that corporate engagement. And sometimes it's really hard to explain. It's not the public raising awareness, it's not the petitions, it's not those pieces. It really is playing with the power dynamics of corporate engagement.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I think we'll continue on that thread because, to your point, it is a harder thing to sort of explain and grasp, and really is the magic of the Canopy Plan B model of business. But I just wanted to call out that last week you spoke at an event hosted by the Canadian Consulate in Beijing in the lead up to COP15 about how Canopy is specifically engaging the fashion sector. And you also recently hosted partner brands representing, at this point, $1.3 trillion in annual revenue from around the world at our return to in-person events at our 2022 Canopy Style Summit. So how is Canopy specifically supporting the fashion sector to drive these types examples of forest conservation and ultimately protect terrestrial biodiversity?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our sort of initial outreach to companies is really focused on, can you put in place a public procurement policy? And with that stated publicly, with those goals, you know, there's a lot in those public policies, but the two main threads are, we're not going to source from the world's ancient endangered forests, and we're going to forward what Canopy likes to call next generation solutions. So where else can we get these fibers from? Just to take a little side road on what next generation solutions are.
Of course, please do.
Yeah. So basically, you know, for example, if you check your tag in your clothing and you see a product like rayon, viscose, sometimes it's branded Tencel, those are all products that come from trees. So increasingly, we're seeing, you know, as markets shrink on things like newsprint, writing grade papers, we're all using less of that, of course. We're not seeing a reduction in the pressure on forests. We're seeing, of course, much more packaging. We're all getting more and more boxes at our doors, I think, these days that come in paper-based packaging. And then we're seeing an increased trend on using trees in clothing as well. It's the third most common raw material input for fabric these days, and it's on the increase. So when Canopy took a look at that fiber supply chain, what we learned very quickly is that Brazil, the Amazon, being in Brazil, Indonesia, and North American forests like Canada's boreal forest are all sort of regions that are under threat from that growing demand for our wardrobes. So we took that to the marketplace about 9 years ago, and we started talking to brands about it. And at the time, some brands didn't even know that the raw material inputs were trees. Those that did had absolutely zero visibility on their supply chain. But a couple 20 early igniters sort of launched with us, not knowing what they didn't know, and the Canopy Style Initiative was born. And so fast forward to today, we have 500. Actually, I think this morning we were just doing a taking stock and campaign planning, and we actually have 517 brands, retailers that are part of the Canopy Style Initiative. And all of them are publicly calling for those two main threads of work within their supply chain. What we quickly realized is those forest regions that I mentioned that are supplying the pulp, a vast majority of the production is in China. And actually, the 10 largest producers of these fibers control 80% of the global market share. So there's a real pinch point in the supply chain in these forest-based fabrics. And so we developed a whole stream of work to engage that pinch point. And each year we produce a report about how those actors within the supply chain are performing. And Peter leads that report for us. So maybe, Peter, I can hand it over to you to just talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So as Amanda mentioned, while there may be many people that are involved in this industry in terms of companies that are securing the fiber, and from there that might be distributed to many places in the world. The producers of this man-made cellulosic fiber present a really unique bottleneck for the industry, that pretty much 99% of the total volume passes through only about a dozen or so producers of this fiber. So we're able to really focus our efforts and to ensure that these small number of producers avoid the use of ancient and endangered forests in that sourcing. And so we do that through a series of audits that are done by a third-party auditing firm. And what the auditing firm does is once we secure a policy commitment from a producer, that producer would engage with the auditor to look through the supply chains and to ensure that ancient and endangered forests are not entering the supply. Now, why would a company opt to do this? Well, this is entirely incentivized through participation in our annual report. The hot button report ranks producers, assigning them different colors of shirts, ranging from different shades of green all the way through to yellow, and then finally red, indicating the level of sustainability of their sourcing and the number of points, or buttons as we call them, that indicate progress made towards those goals. And what's fascinating is over the last 7 years that this has been in place, we've seen that the system is really working. That this scheme that was invented and really provided a spotlight on an issue that previously I think really nobody even knew about, that ancient and endangered forests were entering the fashion market. So all of a sudden, this has really become a focal point for this sector every year, and it's anticipated. How are these different producers going to perform in terms of this environmental ranking? And so, this year we've seen a lot of movement among those producers. We've seen an increase up to 17 of the producers now have a green shirt, indicating that they've eliminated the risky sources from their supply chain. We've seen 6 of the top ranked dark green shirts indicating a very high level of performance, up from 2 in previous years. So that's all very, very positive. And I think that this really is fundamentally driven by brand demand. So where we have these over 500 brands and the brands making these commitments to only buying from green shirt sources without risky supply, this has been absolutely a strong signal to these producers that they should perform well in the hot button report. And so, in addition to the these colored shirts and these points, what I get really excited about is the action that represents. So, in order to achieve those points, they're having to do things. And some of the things that they have to do involve real tough work. They have to, demonstrate a commitment to conservation. They have to change their supply over to circular next generation fiber sources. We have companies that never would have touched next gen, starting to dabble in doing pilot programs, and they're doing research and innovation. And this is all driven by an interest in performing well in this hot button report. So it's been really fascinating to watch this improvement. It's based on incremental, kind of year-over-year improvement. And these audits are really done as learning audits. They're not kind of a punitive audit if you pass or fail. These audits that the companies undergo, they get a lot of information back, a lot of information that they may not have even been aware of about where their supply chains trace back to. So it's a very collaborative process. It's a very educational process, and it's ultimately driven by companies making commitments to do the right thing.
Thank you so much, Peter. Is it the professor in you that really likes the sort of grading system of stickers and A+ to motivate producers? I think that's amazing. But you are correct. It is ultimately the work that Canopy does with brands. So if our annual ranking of viscose producers is really a result of that brand engagement, Amanda, how does that support this producer progress as far as those relationships we build with brands? Like, it's a big ask. So how does Canopy approach going to a brand and saying, hey, we really want you to get behind this? And what do you think is the motivating factor behind brands? Is it increased transparency? Is it just the relationships? I'd love to sort of hear a little bit more about that process and share with the group.
Sure. Yeah, I never ever thought in my life I'd have so many conversations about buttons, which is the point allocation in the hot button report. It cracks me up. But yeah, I think maybe just sharing a story from the early days. You know, when we first approached the largest producer at the time of these fibers going into fabric, and you know, we put on the table, we'd love to see this coming from something like recycled textiles instead of trees. They basically told us it was impossible and laughed us out of the room. And if we fast forward to today, you know, they just signed a partnership agreement for 100,000 tons of pulp from recycled textiles, that same company. So it's amazing what can happen in 9 years. You know, I describe Canopy's work as sort of running circles around individuals until they catch our energy. Because we're a fairly carrot-based. Sometimes our carrots are a little sharpened to be a little pointy, but we're pretty carrot-based organization. And I think we would all be very, very clear that you know, that producer would not have moved if it weren't for the 500 brands that are backing those two sort of streams of solutions with Canopy. So we hit a point in the hot button report. I think at the time we were at sort of 200 brands strong, where 50% of the producers had reached, of the production volumes had reached green shirt. And that really was a tipping point. That allowed us to approach really, really large brands. So for example, Walmart, Amazon are part of the initiative now. And that's partly because they know the solutions exist at scale for them to avoid ancient and endangered forests. So it really has been sort of a strategic sort of upping of keeping the supply chain engaged enough to be responsive enough to some of those volume requests. If I think about what comes next for all of us as we look to tackle the fashion sector, we really have to, you know, see these next generation solutions scale up. And so I'm sure you'll probably have another Understories session on sort of how we plan to do that. But that is going to be key and critical to maintain the momentum and to see our pressure reduced on ancient endangered forests over the long term. If we go back to sort of that first question you asked me, you know, BC's coastal temperate rainforests, Canada's forests, the forests that we know very, very well at Canopy. What we've seen is the projected demand for these forest fibers going into fashion has not come to reality. So we haven't seen the mills switch over to produce pulp for these fabric lines that we were expecting to see when we first started the campaign. And sometimes those things are really, really hard to measure. You know, what hasn't happened, but I rest a little easier at night knowing that some of the mills that were scheduled to be built, that were scheduled to be retrofitted, haven't happened in some of the world's most critical forests. More work to do. I would say that we need to see more success on that front in Indonesia, but we have the two world's largest fiber producers asking Canopy, are there going to be recycled textile pulp mills in Indonesia, for example. And so just getting those questions, I think, is really, really a sign of not only our success, but the opportunities we have to lean into moving forward.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I love how you are always looking forward. I think that's the same for the rest of the Canopy team. But yes, we should absolutely host an Understories on Next Gen. There's a lot to dig into and a lot of really exciting things that we can start to share in 2023 as far as we tap into what's next and share that with our Canopy friends and family. So this is a little bit of a different direction, but we leverage these industry giants and major stakeholders as a buy-in to the level of change we're pursuing and actioning. But something that, you know, I think comes up is and it's a tricky question because I don't think individuals bear the burden of this, but for folks who do want to participate in these movements, what can individuals do to support 30 by 30? And how can viewers at home, you give a little bit of insight into how people can spot fabrics made from trees, but what are some other actions that people can take? Because we know this is sort of an all hands on deck juncture that we're at.
For sure. I think one of the most interesting things that's happening in the fashion sector specifically is we're starting to see some of the largest brands, and some of the most, potentially problematic, folks like Shein, folks like Inditex who own Zara, H&M, have resale platforms. So obviously that's still one step down the chain. So the first thing, do you need to buy it, right? If you're going to buy it, is it quality? Those are the things we have to put first and foremost as we think about our wardrobes. If you're going to buy it, can you buy it used? And I think just seeing some of these large brand partners of ours take on resale and even put their foot in that arena is fascinating, and something that I think, what is the path to decoupling raw material inputs from business success, I think is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. So yeah, do you need it? Buy used, buy quality. Start to look for, and this is something as it comes, as I mentioned, there's this new mill, 100,000 tons of pulp production from recycled textiles. We're just on the edge of you starting to see recycled textiles in your wardrobes instead of these tree-based fabrics, but let's start looking for that on labels. Is this product made from recycled textiles instead? And then check your label. If it says rayon, if it says viscose, modal, or tencel, you're wearing trees, and our estimate is approximately a third of those fabrics are coming from the world's ancient endangered forests. It's 200 million trees a year going in. So those are things you want to avoid. Just on the label, the less mixed your clothing is, the better. So the polyester mixed with the cotton, mixed with the viscose, those create problems if we're looking at building recycled infrastructure. It can be done, but the more pure your labels are, that helps us all out as well as we think of long-term solutions.
Amazing. Peter, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Anything that you would want to pass on as far as individual actions that you think can help participate in some of these movements?
Well, I think that if you had told me 10 years ago that the chant of 30 by 30 was going to be so mainstream, I never would have believed you. In 1992, we aspired to protect 12% of the world's lands, and that was considered to be a big stretch goal. So I think there's just something about people talking about the level of ambition and raising our ambition. That we've talked about Overton windows of the range of acceptable discussion, and I love to see people think big and to really stretch their imaginations to imagine what it could look like to set aside more areas. So just talking about it, whether it's on social media or just in amongst family and friends, thinking about how we can expand our protection. And maybe at your next party over the holidays, you can introduce a fun fact that much of the fabric in the room might actually come from trees. So have a nice conversation, drop some fun facts on people. So sometimes just talking about the issue can be a really great contribution that people can make.
Yeah, you'll be the life of the party as you get everybody checking their tags. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. Right. If anyone needs any support with how to approach your family about climate challenges and solutions, our inboxes are open, because I think we have some of these mind-changing conversations on the daily. So we are going to go to our lovely participants to see if there are any questions. While we're waiting for people to sort of gather their thoughts and add any questions to the chat, please, now is your opportunity. If you've always been dying to ask Peter Wood or Amanda Carr something. Don't be shy. But just one last question on a really personal note for both Amanda and Peter. Given that this is a critical juncture, given that we know that our inaction will be largely catastrophic to life as we know it, what are you personally motivated by in your climate-focused work? And what do you sort of think of, or I guess the follow-up question to that is, what's biodiversity to you?
Go ahead, Peter.
Both at the same time.
There's a few interesting questions contained within that. I think what's inspiring me right now here at COP is voices from Indigenous people that have been leading on, calling for a rights-based approach, showing that Indigenous peoples have been leading on this issue long before we've been talking about 30 by 30. There was a full-day event held at McGill that preceded the COP that gave me a lot of inspiration, just examples from around the world of Indigenous-led conservation that are taking place. We've got an announcement yesterday from Canada that $800 million will be spent on 4 different new protected areas, including the Great Bear Sea initiative. There's reason to believe that we could see some movement, based on the grassroots efforts to protect old growth in British Columbia, as well as other places around the world. That gives me hope. We've seen governments be responsive in light of that pressure, as well as the private sector and partners that Canopy works with. So it's great to see that pressure, actually, have some concrete outcomes. So that gives me a lot of hope.
And I can just add on. I think, nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, I want to go, ravage an ancient endangered rainforest. I want to destroy the climate. And so Canopy's model of change is often about finding the individuals within these huge, what can be nameless, faceless corporations that share our passion, right? And or need just the tools and the systems to be able to act on our passion. So I think that gives me a lot of hope. I also remember talking to a scientist once who just sort of, pointed out gently to me how little we know, right? And how resilient in some ways this earth is. So just staying humble in that. Basically, if we can contain and shift our systems as human beings, and reduce our impact, we've got an amazing diversity of partners in all that is the natural world to rebuild, restore, and get us back to a place. And we don't even understand the complexity of those systems. So it's basically, we only really have to take care of our own shop as human beings, and that gives me some comfort, because they're just systems that we've created, and they're systems that we can recreate, really.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Peter. It's really nice to hear sort of what drives this work and, a lot of the progress to come. So we do have a few questions. The first is from Gail Epstein. It's a little bit of an observation that Tencel brand is created from farm trees, just still not ideal, but not old forest. So I think that we've touched on this distinction a little bit, but Peter or Amanda, if either of you want to kind of just comment on what sort of the end goal is and why we still are pushing toward completely forest free down the road.
Yeah, so Canopy laid out a pathway. It's called Survival, a pulp thriller. And really within that, there's 2 streams. So the first is that we're looking for these forest-based fabrics. Tencel is one of them. It's a branded product. We're looking for 50% to come from next generation solutions, things like recycled textiles by 2030. It's not only Canopy's vision, it's shared by many, many brands who've signed on for our vision for viscous. And there still is a place for some tree fiber. So it's not an anti-tree, no trees ever kind of landscape. There's places where we've conserved enough to protect ecosystem integrity, where forest harvesting is happening under certification systems like Forest Stewardship Council certification. Those are absolutely acceptable, right, in terms of long-term solutions for the fiber basket. The emphasis from Canopy comes so focused on these next generation solutions because in part that's the piece of the system that entirely needs to shift. That requires the Canopy energy of running around and around and around. So that's sort of the vision that Canopy has in the space.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We'll go to a question from Nathan Collette, and I hope I'm pronouncing everyone's names properly. So thank you so much for joining us, Nathan. First question is not exactly related to our work, but I'd like to open it up for discussion if you want to touch on it, which is just, do we know of similar efforts to transform supply chains in the oil and gas industry? The follow-up to that is actually a question about how we see the BC government in particular. And are there indirect things that government can do to support the work that Canopy is doing, even if it's sort of through the path of lawsuits from the industry and taking direct action? So I don't know if either of you want to touch on oil and gas, but I know we can certainly speak to BC government as well.
I mean, I could say that there's definitely a comparison here in terms of an intersection of both climate and biodiversity impacts, that oil and gas has. I did part of my PhD looking at the intersection between oil and gas and the forest industry in northern Alberta, and certainly the two, have an interplay. Similarly, a lot of times oil and gas is punching new infrastructure, linear infrastructure into intact forests with outsized impacts behind that. And that's similar to Canopy's concern about logging in primary forest. Even if the company has the best intentions of doing really great forestry, sometimes putting that linear infrastructure, that's a fancy word for roads and pipeline rights of ways, when that infrastructure gets put in, often it triggers a series of events afterwards that results in further degradation. So that's one of the reasons Canopy really emphasizes on we really need to get out of logging primary forests, and that there's we have a lot of great models for how we can turn our attention to managing sustainably within our existing footprint, and even better, where we don't really need to harvest trees at all. And that's really the next level. That's the next generation, and moving towards a full circular economy where we don't have to be taking new things out of the ground. So I think there's probably an equivalent analogy there for oil and gas. We've got to stop taking things out of the ground as well, and switch to renewable energy and solar. Well, the equivalent here for Canopy would be switching from virgin fiber and getting onto a circular economy that's grounded in reducing waste. And I think that we're starting to see just how possible it is for both sectors to get off that old model of doing business.
And then if I could just add, I think Peter sort of touched on it, but what we know, and I read a report coming out, there's $1.8 trillion going in from government subsidies that are subsidizing traditional, conventional extractive resources, right? So what we need is government leadership and to transition some of that to circular models, to things like that. I think the question is really, really compelling, right? The lawsuits from industry sort of putting constraints on government's ability to act is the question that's being asked. And so what can we do to sit down together to reduce that as a counter, right? So I can assure you that the companies buying forest products out there in the universe are not wanting to buy from suppliers that are suing government for doing the right thing. So I think, this opportunity to triangulate, because I know Canopy's looking to support as well. And we're able, there's occasions where we've been able, for example, there was a UN report that was being held up by a forest company. And we were able to get a bunch of their customers to encourage them to stop holding that report up. So those kinds of sweet spots are something that maybe we can work on together to grease the rails, as it were.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I just want to do a call out for any more questions. And, if there's no more questions, then we can end our session shortly, but just want to give a little bit of time and space for folks to get their last questions in. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined. I see some really thoughtful commentary here, and it's nice to have people joining from all over the world. Any more questions? All right. Well, honestly, Peter, Amanda, I just want to say thank you so much for your thoughtful and knowledgeable answers, especially Peter taking time out of a very busy COP15 schedule. We're grateful for you being there on the ground today. And a huge thank you to everyone who joined in. It was really wonderful to have you here. This is my first Understories, so fantastic to meet a bunch of you. And I hope that we'll be in conversation soon again shortly. So we will share a recording of this call with you in the coming days. That will come to the same email address you got the event invite to. And if you have any questions after the event, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to chat further. It really is invigorating to have our involved community. So don't be shy. You can reach out to hello@canopyplanet.org. And just thank you so much. It was an honor to host everyone here today. So really appreciate it. And a big thank you again, of course, to Peter and Amanda.
Thanks for having us.